everyone, it's Lisa from My Dream in Soap. Welcome to my channel and thanks for dropping by. Today we're going to be making a mechanics soap and I'm going to do a combination of beer and coffee with some nice exfoliants, so this is a nice cleaning soap. You may have recently seen my oat milk soap, where in that recipe I showed you how to make oat milk and use it as a partial replacement for your water in a soap recipe. For this recipe we're going to completely change the water for beer, so a 100% substitution. So I've just brought up an extract of my soap calc recipe here onto the screen, where you can see I've got my oils. I have 1,200 grams of oil for the soap that I want to make, and I've used my normal liquid percentage. I always work at typically a just over 35% lye concentration, which is about 25% of liquid to oils. Now there's no complicated maths involved here at all. All we want to do is take what would normally be our water and literally just swap it for our alternative liquid. So in my case I'm using some Guinness beer. I've just got one of the larger cans of beer here. Now this holds 440 millilitres, so therefore when I've actually just boiled this down a little bit it will reduce. It's up to you what you do. If you start with exactly the right amount of beer for your recipe, you are going to lose some as you heat it up, but you can still top that up with some water. I'd rather start with too much of the liquid, so it will then obviously concentrate a bit as it reduces down slightly. So all I'm going to do is take my little pan of Guinness and heat it, bring it to a simmer and let it simmer gently for about 20 minutes or so. What we're trying to do is eliminate the alcohol and also to eliminate all the fizz. The reason you want to get rid of those two things is they're just going to react badly in your soap. And if you start adding lye to a fizzy liquid, you're going to have all sorts of problems with sort of eruptions and things going on in your bowl as you add your lye solution in. Now, as this is going to be a mechanics type soap, I want it to be nice and scrubby, so I'm going to add in two different exfoliants. The first of those is coffee grounds. Now you can add any coffee that you like into your soap. It doesn't have to be some super snazzy fancy coffee. You just literally want the feel of the coffee ground. Clearly something like an instant coffee is not going to work because that's just going to dissolve. And if you're a coffee drinker, you could then just brew yourself some coffee up in the morning and then just save the grounds for using in your soap. I don't drink coffee, I'm actually allergic to it, so I don't have any coffee making equipment at all. That's why I'm using this teeny weeny little pan. I've just put some coffee grounds in here. I'm just going to cover them over with some distilled water and then just heat that water up and let the coffee grounds sit in that, just as if you were brewing yourself some coffee. You could use just dry, fresh coffee grounds if you wanted to, but they're likely to be very scratchy in the soap. So brewing them first, softening them a little bit, will just take some of that scratchy edge off. Now once you've brewed your coffee, you want to reclaim those coffee grounds. So just straining it through a coffee filter seems like a good plan to get the coffee grounds out. Now if you wanted to make a coffee soap, you absolutely could just use this coffee to make a coffee soap. The reason that I'm choosing to make a beer soap rather than a coffee soap is because I want the bubbles that you're going to get from the extra sugar that's in the beer. Coffee won't give you extra bubbles. And if you have a soap that's got a lot of exfoliants in it, it can actually tend to destroy the bubbles a little bit. So putting something in with a sugary content that's going to create bubbles is a good plan. And then lastly, if you're going to use these coffee grounds in maybe a lighter coloured soap, it may be worth you leaving these grounds to dry off a little bit to stop them bleeding in your soap. that's not going to be a problem for me because of the colour of my soap. And now by this time our beer is ready, and as you can see here, as I'm stirring the beer, I'm just not getting any fizz or anything, so I'm quite happy that this is ready. And also notice I've not reduced it down much, I haven't boiled it madly, I've just gently simmered it. In my recipe I'm going to do a 100% water replacement with this beer. Now the beer has got a high sugar content, so we're going to freeze the beer because the sugar and the lye will react together and cause lots and lots of heat. So let's start off with it frozen so we don't get too much of a heat reaction when we mix these together. Okay, so fast forward, and I've now got my beer frozen and the lye that I need all weighed out. I just froze mine in one block. You could freeze it in individual cubes if you wanted. And if you notice, mine isn't completely solidly frozen. I just find if it's really solid frozen, you just spend extra time trying to get the lye to melt the really frozen ice. So a little bit of defrosting I find works really well. So we're just going to add our lye in a little bit at a time and just let that gradually mix in and dissolve, and then add in a little bit more. Now sometimes when you see people doing this method, they also have their jug that they're using to mix their lye solution sitting in an ice bath to keep it extra cool. We don't really need to do that here. I'm doing a beer soap with dark beer. It's going to be fine. Where you'd normally see that technique is something like maybe a milk soap, where it's really important to keep the temperature of the milk nice and low so that you don't scorch it. So we'll just carry on with this gradual process until all of our lye's been dissolved. By that time, this is likely to be really quite hot, so we're just going to set it aside and let it cool down to a nice working temperature, which for me, I always soak between 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. If you did want to speed up the cooling down process, you could at this stage take your jug and sit it in a water bath. I always find a water bath is more effective if it's not just pure ice, so a mixture of ice and water will cool something down much quicker. Okay, so let's now make our soap. So I've got my cooled beer lye solution, and I'm just going to add in my sodium lactate. I always use this in all of my soaps. I use it at 1.32% of oils. I know that sounds a really funny amount, but remember in the UK we have to be very precise about everything we put in our soaps. That basically works out at 1 teaspoon per pound of oils type rate. I've prepared all my oils, and they're again between 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm also using some French red clay, and here are those coffee grounds that have drained off nicely. The fragrance oil I'm using is Palo Santo from Sensory Perfection in the UK. Now when I tested this fragrance oil, as you can see in my little tester block, it actually discolours to this really gorgeous coppery brown type colour. So I'm just going to go with that. I think it's really beautiful. So with that and the combination of the dark beer, and that's why I chose the red clay rather than any other type of clay, that should give me that lovely deep brown copper colour. I'm going to start off by dispersing my clay just into my oils and giving them a really good blend around to make sure they're nicely dispersed and we've got no speckly bits or anything. Once that's all nicely dispersed, I'm going to bring in my coffee grounds, and that's it. I don't want to add any other colourants because we've already seen the beautiful colour that this fragrance oil discolours too. And this is aimed at being a sort of mechanics type soap. So I don't want any fancy swirls or patterns or anything in this. I want this to be a nice, plain, practical bar of soap. Now I've got three things that are going to cause this batter to accelerate. I've got my fragrance oil that accelerates slightly. It's not a mad accelerator. I've got some clay in there. And I've also got all that sugar in the beer. And that's fine because, as I said, I've decided to do a nice plain soap. So being able to use all of those brilliant ingredients is perfect for this type of soap. So then in with our lye solution. Now I haven't got this too cold, but again it's between my 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit range that I like to soap in. I don't want it too hot because I know we're doing a plain soap, but I don't want this to accelerate too quickly. I want to get a nice pour. And also I don't want it too cold. If I get it too cold, my recipe does tend to hit a false trace. And also as well, if you soap too cold, you're likely to get those horrible white steric spots in your soap, which on my beautiful bronzy colour soap, I really don't want. I'm just going to blend this up to emulsion. It's quite tempting, I think, when you're doing a single pour to perhaps blend it up to, a medium trace. However, remember, this is going to move quickly and I don't want to be blobbing it into the mould. So just emulsion for me, because I've still got to add my fragrance oil, which we know is going to accelerate a bit, and I've got to add in my pumice, which is my second exfoliant. I tend to use the ground pumice, or sometimes it's called pumice powder, in my soaps. And I find this is just a good amount of exfoliation. It's a very small grain. It's not as harsh as anything like sand or walnut shells or anything. It is actually quite a reasonably gentle exfoliant. So that, coupled with the coffee grounds, gives me a nice balance. And then just before I pour, I'm giving another good stir round, and I'm checking that the grains of the pumice and the coffee are suspending nicely throughout the soap. So we're at a thick enough trace that this doesn't all sink down to the bottom of our soap. And then it's just simply a case of pouring it into my mould. And you can probably see as I pour here that it's starting to thicken up quite quickly. But it's still fluid enough that it pours nicely into the mould without giving us any lumps and bumps and air pockets or anything. And then just a nice tap down with the mould and a final smooth out of any little bits that are still a little bit lumpy, because that batter's reasonably thick now. Then just a final little clean up around the mould, and then I'll cover the soap and I'll C-pop it as normal. So into my oven that's been preheated to 70 degrees C, that's about 160 degrees F. Turn the oven off as soon as the soap goes in and leave it there overnight. And here's our soap the next day. And holy cannoli, did I forget to press play? Yes, I did. But don't worry, I saved it. And you can see here that discoloration where it's light on the inside or it hasn't been exposed to the air, and that really cool discoloration band round the outside of the soap. Sometimes people get a little bit confused about discoloration or partial gel. If you've got a soap that's going to discolour because of a fragrance oil, it will be a uniform band around the outside of the soap, literally following the pattern of the outside of the soap. If you've got a partial gel, you'll then have a circular dark patch in the middle of your soap. So we'll just do one more. I'm sure we don't need to see the whole plain bar being cut, and then we'll just see some final pictures of the soap. So here are our final soaps. These will be available in the shop on the February the 1st shop update. I hope you've enjoyed this video and you like the soap. If you have, it'd be great if you gave me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see what I'm making in the future, then why not subscribe to my channel? And if you've got any questions or comments, then please leave them in the comments section below and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching everyone. Happy soaping!